Welcome to this event of the extended program of EUSEW. We're sorry for the little delay, so we will start right on, not to waste any more time. This event is jointly organized by 3 Horizon 2020 projects, the EERAdata project, ENEFIRST project, and sEEnergies project. You can see that we have 5 great speakers this morning with a quite rich agenda. So I suggest we start right away with Matthias Grejcik from the European Commission, who will present us the brand new recommendation and guidelines published on energy efficiency first by the Commission. Matthew, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and good morning again. Yes, I'll try to present the Commission's actions, the recent actions that we have adopted recently, and represent Let's Walk the Talk, because we announced that energy efficiency is the priority for the Commission in the European Green Deal communication. So there is some follow-up of this announcement to make it really happen. It started, let's say, in the Fit for 55 package when we proposed a recast of the EED, and there is a new dedicated article on the energy efficiency first, where there are some specific requirements for member states to apply basically cost-benefit analysis and then to follow up with ensuring some verification and reporting. But the focus of today's presentation, if you can move to the next slide, is the recommendation and the guidelines that were put in the annex of this document. And these documents were adopted quite recently, end of September, and they were accompanied by the launch event where we presented the 2 documents. So you can move to the next slide, please. So the recommendation builds on the article, on the new proposed article in the EED recast. It can be a standalone, so the recommendation is not something that really complements. It builds on the article, but it also is a standalone document that sets all the requirements that we would suggest for member states to follow in order to apply the principle in the best way. The first recommendation of the set of recommendations that are under this document is to ensure that energy efficiency first principle is actually applied. And we emphasize it should be done in a proportional way and taking the context into account. So it's not something that always favors energy savings, but something that should be looked at. We also ask to treat the principle as an overarching policy and to apply it looking at other objectives. Mainly it's the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions and also security of supply, as these are the areas that often are mentioned when there might be some issues of trade-offs. We also ask to take a system approach and wider societal perspective for cost-benefit analysis, ask for verification of the application of the principle, to identify relevant entities who would be responsible for monitoring, also reporting of the principle. The intrinsic part of the application of the principle, in our view, is to provide the right framework conditions so that the principle could be applied and then followed by specific measures that are assessed as the most cost-effective ones. And then another recommendation is to provide information, guidelines, and assistance to relevant parties, specifically concerning the methodology for cost-benefit analysis, in particular at the local level, where this information is still missing. And the collection of data and monitoring is the last thing that we emphasize, as this is something that should be collected in order to ensure that there is some sufficient information, sufficient knowledge that could be used then for the assessment of energy efficient alternatives for the upcoming decisions. So it's not necessarily for the ones that are being taken, but we know there is a deficit of data information, so there has to be some more efforts in this respect, so that this cost-benefit analysis and assessment could be done in a coherent way. And then the last overarching recommendation is to follow and promote the guidelines. And actually the guidelines, if you can move to the next slide, is actually our explanation, our view, how we should apply the principle, how this recommendation should work in practice. So the guidelines are primarily aimed at public sector, but they can be also applied by market entities. The requirements from the Article 3 also apply mainly to the regulated markets and public authorities. So market entities are, they could apply it more on a, let's say, informative way. And the guidelines are based on a study analysis to support the implementation of the energy efficiency first principle in decision making that was adopted earlier this year. We can say that while we can distinguish, or we divided the guidelines in 3 main parts, we still explain the approach because there is still some doubts what the principle mean, how it should be applied. Then we also, in the second part, focus on the application of the principle in the decision-making process, and this is basically by drawing on the study that I just mentioned, and explain how it should be applied to assess various options when in impact assessment and cost-benefit analysis, where we provide specific tools and methodologies. We also, in the last part, provide insight into some specific sectors and areas where there are some examples of the application. Next slide, please. So regarding the approach, it's also drawing on the recommendation. So you could see that from the recommendation, what is the general approach, interpretation, application of the principle. Wider context is very important. Societal perspective, system approach. So looking at how the system works, it's not necessarily energy savings at all costs. Action depends on the type and level of decision-making process and also decision maker. So we had different actions, different phases of decision-making process distinguished based on the study. These do not always apply. They depend on the context, sector, and the decision maker. It is important what has to be done, and it's clear understanding of this rather than how to put it in the which box of typology. And then there are possible divergent incentives. If you look at the society, investor, or user, so this should be considered why the decision should be primarily taken from the societal perspective. If not, there should be some enabling conditions and incentives to encourage, in particular, market actors to better take into account the societal benefits, so that the decision favors those solutions that are cost effective, in particular, energy efficient solutions, because we believe there are quite some wider benefits that are not fully taken into account. Next slide, please. So when it comes to the decision-making process, as indicated briefly earlier, we distinguish various phases to be considered: inception, preparation, validation, and implementation. On the top of it, we pay particular attention to monitoring and evaluation of the impacts. Given that the focus is on public sector, most of the actions described are on the inception and preparation phase, but as explained earlier, not always all phases are applicable, and some actions can be in different phases depending on the context. For key decision makers, these are policymakers, regulatory authorities, and market entities. And again, different types of decision makers need to take different actions depending on the context and sector. Next slide, please. When it comes to the analysis of impacts, which is the next big part, we focus on the use of impact assessment and cost-benefit analysis. So there is not something new to be developed. What we want is to improve the functioning of the existing methodologies, existing process. When there is a requirement for impact assessment cost-benefit analysis, we would like them to better look at the energy efficiency solutions. One of those important aspects is to looking at projections, common projections for energy consumptions, and also analyzing impacts of energy consumption. Then analyzing wider benefits from various perspectives, that is societal, investor, and user perspective, and to apply specific tools and methodologies that could help monetize wider benefits of energy efficiency. So if you go to the next slide, please. I will not go into the detail of this section because there are quite a lot of tools and methodologies mentioned. We refer to various studies, and these are normally at quoting the values at the EU level. So of course there is a question how this could be more accurate to adapt it to the local circumstances, national circumstances. So so some further up work could be necessary. As I mentioned, that monitoring is quite important in our approach. So we believe that there is a need to define supervisory competences for energy efficiency first principle to ensure that actually it's properly applied. So we'd like to see a dedicated entity. It does not have to be a new body. We see specific role for national regulators or local authorities dealing with some transport planning, energy planning. So it's just to define clearly competences rather than setting up new body for the energy efficiency. For the verification, it's important to check that impact assessment and cost benefit analysis apply specific methodologies and criteria. And when it comes to approval, is to check if energy efficiency criteria has been properly taken into account when preparing the project. For monitoring, it's important to set the right indicators, also to set the right reporting obligations. We try to indicate the thresholds because we know reporting is associated with administrative burden, but without this feedback mechanism, reporting a loop is difficult to control and ensure that the principle is applied. For the time being, we've seen that it's more recognized rather than applied consistently across the board. So this reporting and then also evaluation is quite important to gather the proper information on the real impacts, how to take into account behavior and rebound effects, so that we can really say that what was assessed for benefits or cost of energy efficiency really take place in real life. Next slide, please. And this is the last slide, which is on the final part of the guidelines, where we present different sectors and indicate areas to be looked at and examples of measures. I will not go into details, just indicate that we also look at the supply side and the demand side and use of energy. We look at electricity markets, energy supply and distribution, and for the end use, energy demand in industry and services, buildings, transport, water, and ICT. There could be other sectors to be looked at, but this we considered as quite pertinent at this stage. Importantly, we pay specific attention to financial sector. We want to promote the principle in the financial sector. So there was a new EFIC working group, Energy Efficiency Financial Institution Group, created to actually develop some methodologies and look into the application of the energy efficiency first principle. We also highlight what is necessary to be done with defining funding mechanism and financial incentives. And there is going to be some follow-up because we consider that application of the principle in the finance sector is quite important. And I think this would be the brief introduction from my side on the guide. I would encourage everyone to have a look at the documents and and provide us feedback, because we know that this is just a first big step into helping to apply the principle, and we do not exclude that there is going to be some follow-up work. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Maciej. So we can now take a few questions. So you can use the question panel to send us your questions. And in the meantime, you can also find in the chat the link to the European Commission recommendation and guidelines, and also the link that you can see on this current slide on the event that is organized as part of EUSEW next week. I would have a first question for you, Maciej, is do you think that the implementing energy efficiency first can be done by simply adjusting the current policy framework and regulation, or do you see that it would require some more fundamental changes?
Well, adjusting regulation is one of the approach. What we see as the first feedback is as long as the principle is seen as a requirement, so if you adjust the framework and not as a priority, it's not difficult to actually make it work. It's still the principle is about the consideration of energy efficient solutions, taking into account if they are cost effective. So the question is how you look at the cost effectiveness, if you look at the right data, if you apply the right indicators, if you properly look at wider benefits. So there is much more much more to be done than to put new requirements, but we also try to explore how to integrate the principle in various strategies and legal acts. And for instance, for the proposal for 10E, we try to put energy efficiency first principle explicitly for the requirements and the methodology for the assessment of infrastructure projects.
That looks definitely an important challenge, and I hope you will succeed in changing the 10E regulation. That would be very promising for showing that the principle can have very important impacts. I don't see other questions for the moment. Don't be shy. You can definitely use the question panel, and we can also come back to Matthew's presentation later in the webinar. So even if questions come up later, feel free to put it, and you just start your question maybe with the name of the speaker you want to ask the question to. I suggest now we switch to the next presentation. Thanks a lot, Matthew, for setting the ground and especially pointing that energy efficiency first is about thinking in terms of whole system approach and wider societal perspective. And from the top level of the European Union, now we are going to the ground and see what can be done in practice. And I'm very happy to welcome Anders Lichtam from the city of Copenhagen, that will present us also some recent and upcoming developments about demand-side resources in properties in Copenhagen. Anders, the floor is yours.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you very well.
Oh, okay, fine.
So yeah, now I think you can go to the next slide.
Thank you for inviting me. I've got 10 minutes. I will show a little bit of what we have done historically, where we are now, and what we are looking into in the future. First of all, I'm from city of Copenhagen, and we have some properties. We do refurbishment of those properties, and we also do maintenance, and that we have some money for, that we have to prioritize, but we can also make business cases to the political level. So you can change the slide. Next. We own 2.6 million square meters of buildings, and then we also rent a lot of buildings. We have an energy budget on 50 million around every year. That is what we spend. We have to cut that down. Then we build also new buildings in the municipality. And we also refurbish buildings in a great scale that also are included in the 170 million. And then we do smaller refurbishment of buildings and technical installations on these buildings for around 100 million yearly. Next. We have one supplier of district heating, and that supplier is actually a company, but 80% of the shares in that company are owned by the municipality. So it is actually a municipality company that are providing us with the district heating. And we have worked very close together with them in the solutions, in some of the solutions that I will talk about today. And it also means that all the infrastructure about the meters that the whole city are accounted through are owned by the utility company for district heating and water. It is quite important that the data of this are integrated in our energy monitoring system as well. So we have worked closely together with them to build up the whole platform for data and data exchange in those digital meters. Then on the electricity side, we have one broker. That means that the municipality are buying all the electricity through that broker, but the infrastructure of the cables, the grid, it's national owned, and yeah, it's another case. Next slide. The political target for 25 is that we have to be carbon neutral in 25. So we have to cut down the energy savings from the baseline of 2010 with 40%. Then constantly, the municipality have to reduce administration costs. It was something that started in 14, and we have used that very much in my department to make business cases. When we have this reducing goal in the municipality, then it had opened up for us making business cases. And those business cases have actually been the challenge to make because we only have the knowledge we have. So we have to write business cases, and then we are getting more knowledge about what these investments actually can lead to, and what the history has shown us are that those business cases have been much better than we thought. So in the beginning, we could have had more money if we knew what we know now. And yeah, I will talk about that later. Then we also have a national strategy for the utility companies in the country that they have to cut down with 2% yearly. And that have also been a very good thing for our cooperation with the utility side. So we have actually worked together with business cases with them. Next slide, please. Yes, it's just to say that we have our climate plan that will lead to carbon neutrality. And a new thing in the roadmap for this climate plan are that we have, because of one of our pilot projects now in the roadmap, also a goal in the climate plan that we have to test in a pilot project the potentials in a flexible market for using energy in our buildings. Next slide. All in all our buildings have energy performance certificate. That is the law. But those certificates, they are very traditional. They do not look into the potential if the building have an energy monitoring system. If the building are on a digital energy monitoring system, it doesn't take into account if we have building management systems. It's a very traditional certificates, but they are also good. It can give us an indicator of which kind of smaller and traditional refurbishments we can make on the buildings. We are just right now in the middle of the new energy certificate for all our buildings, a huge investment. But we have in the municipality worked on a system that so we can actually collect and group those different solutions that the certificates say will be a good idea to make with the payback time. Next slide, please. But the first business case we made were actually on a digital energy monitoring system where all our buildings are monitored digitally each hour. And we use that for the whole work in the organization to focus on where to make quick fixes, where to look deeper into buildings, because here we can make benchmarks. That gave us an energy saving on 4% in the business case in total, because the operators in the buildings, they also have access to this system. But the whole implementation of such an energy monitoring system is also a task. So we have also developed education and films and whatever to actually tell those around 3,000 people working in the municipality, about how to use it. What we didn't know at that time, where we made the business case, were that actually the same system can be used to monitoring indoor climate, which is very important now. And the business case for that, we don't know that yet. Next slide, please. After our energy monitoring system, we built a BMS system for the entire city, a huge investment with a payback time also on 6 years. Next slide, please. And it had been a complicated system to build because historically we have BMS systems on all our buildings and with different brands. So the challenge here were actually to make a system where we can centralize all the digital signals from our different BMS systems to single platforms. So we went from having around 80 different platforms hosted different places to now having 4 platforms, and the goal are to have just 1 platform. So we made a standard for how to build BMS systems in the future and use different kind of brands because of the procurement rules in Europe. Of course, we cannot just choose a single. But now we have been writing a standard for how to actually build building management systems so we are able to control them from single points. And that is so important for the future. If we want to go into controlling these systems and energy using machines on exact minutes, and that will be necessary in the future. Next slide, please. That means that for every single building in the municipality, except from the smallest, which only are around 2%, then all our buildings can be controlled centrally from an office, actually. And it also gives us the opportunity to integrate these systems to the utility side. So we can work together with the utility sector and control our systems in the rhythm of the production, I would say. Next slide, please. And that have led us into our new work, our new pilot projects, which are about testing what is flexibility worth for the utility sector. And we do that on the electricity side and also the district heating side. We know that we think that we can control 25% of the total energy use in our buildings flexible. And that means that because we have these BMS systems, that means that we can see a potential in carbon-wise, but also energy saving-wise. Not that much energy saving, but some. But it have a value on the market, and now we are testing that value. When we made the business case for the BMS systems, it was a business case with a short payback time on 6 years. But if we had known at that time that it could also be beneficial to the flexible market, then that business case would have been better. And I hope 1 year or 2 years from now, we can write the total business case because we have been more wise. Next slide, please. That is the challenge. You probably know it, that we are having renewable energy here in Denmark from our windmills. And the production are getting more decentralized and the production are flexible. We have problems in the grid, especially also now where we have to build a lot of charging stations for electrical vehicles in the municipality, but also to all the people that live in Copenhagen. So that charger infrastructure have to be built. That will give problems in the grid. And the smart grids are coming. And if we can go into that market with our buildings and cut down consumption on times where it is needed, then then it will have a value. Next slide, please. So we have built a platform where we can connect our buildings and the BMS systems to that blockchain aggregator model. It's a flexible platform where the market can go in and then they can buy more or less energy consumptions in our buildings. And that is the strategy. We have tested it on one building right now, but and built the platform together with IBM. But we have two pilot projects where we will test this in a broader scale in the next year, both on electricity, where we will have around 100 buildings on the platform connected to the market, and also around 100 buildings on another platform for flexible use of district heating. Yes, thank you. Next, I think it was the last slide, wasn't it?
Yeah, I think it is. Thanks a lot, Anders. I think it was a really, really interesting presentation showing many things that a municipality or local authority can do, and that's very much welcome in this period where we know that there are a lot of discussions about the exemplary role of the public sector, especially with the proposal of the Energy Efficiency Directive recast. There is one question from the audience for you, Anders, from Rasmus Langlois-Nordgren. You mentioned that the digital monitoring system could potentially measure indoor climate. Could you elaborate on what it can actually measure and whether this data could provide relevant data to help quantify and monetize the benefits of improved indoor climate?
Yeah, definitely. The energy monitoring system is just a system actually where different measurings of different things can be cataloged. And now we are measuring the consumption of district heating in a building, for example, and the consumption of electricity. But then we can have another parameter, which could be carbon in the air. It could be the temperature in the air in the building, and also the moistures, the
humidity,
the water. Yeah. And that gauger can be connected to the energy monitoring system. So now when we make flexible use of district heating in 100 buildings, then we set up indoor climate gaugers in 25 of those 100 buildings. So in a building, we set up, for example, 10 indoor climate meters, different places in the building. And then we send the data into the energy monitoring system. But we also send the data to the BMS system. So when the utility sector, for example, cut down our ventilation energy consumption for only 5 minutes maybe, then we can on the indoor climate meter see if it's getting too warm, too cold, if there are too much carbon in the air. And that will be necessary when we go into the flexible market. The municipality as a building owner, have some tenants, and we have to show them that when we are making a flexible market for heating and electricity use in our buildings, then we must be able to show them that it is not on behalf of the indoor climate, that the indoor climate is still the same. Then we can also now see those buildings that have too much carbon emission inside the buildings, where there maybe are no ventilation systems, or where the ventilation systems have to be refurbished. And then we also start to get data for where we have improved the indoor climate. Yes, and that will have a value in those buildings and those business cases. What is indoor climate worth? We have to build that into the business cases in the future. So when we want to refurbish a ventilation system, then there are benefits energy-wise, but also indoor climate-wise. And that is why we need some tools to calculate those business cases, because when I ask for money, I have to actually explain the politicians in the city what is the benefits for investing in this. And those tools are needed for broader planning in general.
And that makes a nice transition.
That is why we have joined your project here in EUSEW.
That's a wonderful transition to the next presentation by Sebastian on the EERAdata project. Maybe before we move to the next presentation, just a very quick question and if possible, a quick answer. You mentioned the important roles also of the interaction with the utilities, etc. And I guess that you have also to work with many departments in the city of Copenhagen. And I think this coordination aspect is essential in the implementation of the energy efficiency first principle, or however you call it, let's say a more comprehensive approach of the energy system. So can you just very briefly tell us if it was easy for you to coordinate with all these various departments and stakeholders?
No, the challenge are actually quite big in two different ways. We have some money every year to refurbish for and build for, but are we using the money correctly, and which kind of prioritizing are we doing in the municipality? And of course, if we have a house where there are holes in the roof, we have to fix it. But could we fix more than that when we are fixing the hole? Do we have the information? Do we have the planning tool to make a planning with the right prioritizing? That is one thing. The other thing are when I make a business case, or when we make a business case in the department, we have to model through. We have to go to all the other sectors in the municipality. Yeah, maybe I'm not on.
No, we don't see you, but we can hear you.
Okay. So we have to actually model through in that way that we all have. There are political process where everybody, they must be aligned on that is what we are spending money on. And that is, so I can write a business case saying, hey, we are investing in this building management system. It will give us some benefits. And that have to be shown to the politicians, and they have to choose, they have to take a decision. This is a good business case. It gives us value. It gives us benefits, and we have a return of investment. So every time we have to make these arguments in our proposals to the politicians. So it's a long process. It takes half a year.
Yeah, we can imagine that, and that's very, useful to hear about your feedback and your experience. Thanks a lot, Anders, again for your presentation. Now we move then, as you already made the transition to EERAdata, because I think you were working with this project as well. And I'm very pleased to welcome now Sebastian Basler from the Technical University of Munich, who is actually the project coordinator of EUSEW. Sebastian, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Sebastian, and thank you also, Anders, for the transition and also for the insights from Copenhagen. Copenhagen is a very valuable partner for us in the EURAdata project. Anders just mentioned it briefly. One of the tasks for flexible grid is to bring down the energy consumption of the building, and EURAdata is kind of heading out to show arguments, to provide arguments to politicians, to planners, how to bring down this energy and why it's important, or what are the benefits of bringing down the energy in buildings. We are operationalizing the EURAdata, the Energy Efficiency First project on a municipal and regional level. This is why we have partners like Copenhagen or the city of Valencia or the region of Andalusia in the project, and we try to bring up solutions and analysis which are quantifying the benefits of energy efficiency at building level. The output of the project will be a software solution, which is kind of combining different assessments for municipalities and energy agencies to briefly assess their building stock and to see what potentials actually a reduction of energy or an implementation of modernization measures has in the building. Next slide, please. So what does operationalizing the energy efficiency first principle on local level mean for us? And for our practical partners? It means a broader justification for energy efficiency investments. It means that identifying economic and monetary benefits for various stakeholders. It's not only the municipalities, it's also planners, it's energy agencies on a regional level. It's probably also for the private sector, for big property owners, a very interesting aspect. Then we are collecting the arguments, and we want to motivate to invest a little bit more, like Anders mentioned, to go when we fix the hole, that we do a little bit more to maybe improve also the indoor climate, to put ventilation systems in, and we want to provide the arguments for that. And then we want to change the role of the building, so we want to change how buildings are seen. They should be seen as a potential, not as a hole for investments. And we want to increase well-being and health, of course, for occupants, and quantify the impact of building renovation in general on societal issues. So we have these different levels, the very local level, the national level, and the societal level in the project. In the beginning of the project, we made a survey within our partners to identify what is actually the problems, why it's not implemented, why is energy efficiency still lacking, why are renovation rates still at 1% or lower, 0.3% in some parts of Europe. And of course, for municipalities, it's always a high initial investment cost. The decisions are mostly, and this is a feedback we got a lot, is based on political and personal drivers. So it's not fact-based, it's not long-term. It's very based on short-term planning. Mostly the energy costs are balanced for long-term, but that's it. Then, of course, smaller municipalities especially have a lack of capacity to provide cost-benefit analysis on the projects they're doing. They don't do these business cases that Anders was talking about. Then there's complex funding procedures with long-term aspects, and you also need a lot of resources to apply for these fundings. Then low knowledge, time, experience, investments are high-risk investments, and a lot of these projects that we're looking into are scattered. So there's a lot of shallow renovation measures which are scattered around different buildings, and it's not combined because it's who screams the loudest gets the project. This is a little bit the feedback that we got at some points, and we are there to provide, especially on this local specific building level, the information that is needed to put the discussion on a fact-based level. Next slide, please. So what are the outputs of EURAdata? I think this is important to mention because we have a main output, which is our software solution, but I think what is also important for stakeholders, scientific stakeholders or municipalities, is that we're developing 5 different calculation methodologies to assess energy efficiency. We have parameters and an indicator list for these assessments. So everyone can actually look into what parameters we are using, what information is needed, what data we need to collect. Then we have templates and guidelines how to collect this data for practical implementation. We have this mentioned software solution and a comprehensive database, which is collecting all the values. And then the final output that's what we're working on at the moment is the implementing guidelines. Next slide, please. EURAdata, and I mentioned it, I think we have a strong focus on practical experiences, and we want to learn a lot from our practical partners in the project. We want to develop things that are useful for them. In this regard, we have 3 regional networks in the project, and I mentioned this because they're also connection points. So if you are in the region, you can also contact our partners there, and they will guide you through the project or help you with questions. So we have a cluster in the north, the Scandinavian cluster, with the Danish Technical University doing the indoor climate modulation, and the city of Copenhagen. We have the Central European cluster with Slovenia as a partner, with the energy agency XENA and the city of Villeneuve. And we have the Mediterranean cluster, which is the region of Andalusia, the energy agency of Andalusia, and the Colegio de Arquitectos de Málaga, so an architecture. And in these 3 clusters, we actually developing our software solutions. Next, please. I mentioned data a lot. So EURAdata, this is actually what the name says, is a database project. And we are relying on the data that we get. We have 5 different assessment methods. And for these methods, we need data to calculate our outcomes. Since data is always a difficult issue, and we are not always pleased by indoor climate measurements or indoor climate meters, mostly we have issues to find the geometric data for buildings, or we have issues to know what materials are actually what materials are in the buildings. And for that, we defined minimum requirements, desired data, and detailed data. Minimum requirements for us means we have data that is needed to run the calculations. If we don't get the real data from the specific building, from the specific location, we can't run our calculations. And then we have the desired data, which we say, okay, this is significantly improving the results if we get the real data for that. And then we have the detailed data, which is kind of the plus at the end. So if we get real data for these parameters, we get a really precise result. In case we don't get the data, so for the minimum requirements, there is no option. We need to have them to perform our calculations, to put it on a local scale. If we don't have them, then we can't run the calculation. If for the desired data, if we don't get the calculation, we try to find statistical defaults. We find national defaults if no regional defaults are available. If we don't find national statistical defaults, then we go to European level and so on. So we have a different ranking system for the quality of data and also how it improves our results. Next, please. Just to show you, I mean, you get I think we shared the slides, so you can look into deeper. There's just a few examples of how the minimum required data looks like. For example, the building age, building width length, the building height, ground surface area. So it's mostly geometric data. And also weather data. What is the location looking like? Is it an urban area? Is it a rural area? Yeah, next one, please. Also going briefly through that. So we defined actually around, I think it's around 170 proxy and default data points, which are actually filled by us as a team and together with our practical partners. And we're looking into climate renovation measure data, life cycle assessment databases, and also the socioeconomic data where I'm going into later, like job creation, construction economy, and these things. So what do we assess? We assess, I mentioned it already, we help the municipalities and regions to prepare the data. So we have templates where they can fill in data. We will prep and clean the data at the moment. We're working on a semi-automatized way to do that. So, but I think this will be part of the next project since EURAdata is almost about to finish. Then we calculate the energy demand and consumption if the data is not available in real life. So if we don't get the consumption data directly from the building, we calculate it. And then the interesting part starts. We're looking into the life cycle assessment. So what is the embedded energy of the building? What will change when we put a renovation, or what is when we put, for example, insulation on the building? It can also be worse than before, the life cycle assessment. Then also the CO2 emissions in the operation phase, and the environmental impact of the building. Then we have the indoor climate assessment, where we're looking into the productivity and well-being effects of people. So based on temperature and CO2, we can see how the productivity is actually affected and how it increases or decreases, and also how many sick days actually are present in the building with the employees. This module, I think, will be proved by the measurements by Copenhagen in the future. I think this is a nice collaboration here. And then socioeconomic, or can be a nice collaboration here. And then we have the socioeconomic assessment, which is kind of combining these results into monetized values, like saying, okay, what is actually social CO2 emissions? What is it costing for society? Or how many jobs can be created by the investment? Or what is the tax returns that are induced by the investment by the municipality? Or how much is a sick day costing? Or how much is productivity increase is actually value? And then to close it, we have the supply side assessment, which is actually the counterpart, and will show what would be the benefits if we just go for the investment in supply side energy generation instead of energy efficiency. Yeah, next please. So to close my presentation, I want to show you a small case study to show the results of our solution. We look into Slovenia, into a small building, or a 5-story building school in Velenje. That's not a real building, it's a fake building to show you the most probable at the most results. But it's very closely modeled to the real buildings in Velenje. Next, please. So what did we renovate in this building? We actually added insulation to roof, to the exterior walls. We exchanged the windows. We added external shading devices. And most important, we changed the heating system. So we changed it from a district heating with non-renewable energy, a coal district heating, to biomass. And we upgraded the lighting system, and we added ventilation. It's important to mention that by actually improving the building, because the building was previously in a very good state, it was not in a bad state. So the final energy demand did not really change that much. So we have a 10% reduction in the final energy demand, but we have a much higher, I think 70% reduction in the primary energy demand. And this is what we're actually looking into, because this is determining the CO2 emissions. And also by adding the ventilation and air conditioning system, we increase the indoor climate, which is showing very high effects in the productivity. So next, please. So first results, and I mentioned already, is the final energy demand. So we went down from 77 kilowatt hours per square meter to 70. This is all calculated by the EUSEW solution. And then the primary energy demand went down from 140 to 28 kilowatt hours. Next, please. This resulted in CO2 emissions, which went down a lot, even if the final energy demand didn't go down that much, from 18 kilogram CO2 equivalent per square meter to 2.1 after the renovation. And then also for the status quo, we went down to 1.4. For the embedded energy, we have went down to 1.4. Next one, please. And I think it's a very interesting result to look into the indoor climate, since we actually installed the ventilation system and the air conditioning system. You can see in the lower graph that you see the indoor air quality categories. So before the renovation, we have spent a lot of time in the category 4. I think, it's the bad. The higher the number, the worse the indoor climate category. So we spent quite a time in category 4, and the whole situation was not too good. And after we installed the ventilation system, we actually spent 100% in category 1. Which means the CO2 emissions in the room are low, and also the indoor quality factors went lower. Then next one, please. This increased or reduced the number of sick days of teachers. Actually, these numbers are based on a long-term study by the DTU in Copenhagen, where they looked into schools and they made a lot of measurements and surveys in this regard. So before the renovation, we had an average 2 sick days per teacher, and which is due to the classroom air quality. So they have more sick days, but when we just look into the sick days that were related to the indoor air quality, then we have 1.8. After the renovation of the envelope, of course, we did not have really a change because it's only energy-wise. But when we added and changed the building services, then we went down to 0 because the indoor air quality was good all over. And the same applies to the performance. So the performance went up from 91% to 92%. And 1% performance increase is quite valuable. Thank you. Next one. When we calculate the monetary benefits over 20 years, we come up to a net present value from 2.23 million euros that can actually be generated by the improve of indoor climate. Next one. Similar things we can say about the job creation. So with these 234,000 euros invested in this location in Velenje, we could actually create around 6 jobs, and 3.1 of them are indirect jobs, 2 of them are direct jobs, and 0.9 are induced jobs. Next one. Then we calculated the tax returns, which are, of course, with this investment sum not too big, but we had around 10,000 euros of tax returns to the municipality. This can change very much on the municipality. This is based on German law at the moment, but we're working on it, making it adjustable for municipalities all over Europe. The tool that we're presenting is actually very flexible, so every parameter can be adjusted to the location where the tool is implemented. Next one. Then we have CO2 cost saving, and then I'm close to the end, where we went down for the social CO2 costs from 10,000 euros pre-renovation to 1,200 euros after renovation. The same goes for the CO2 tax costs in Denmark. This is in Slovenia, and the CO2 ETS costs, it's like emission trading costs. They went also down. Next one. So what is actually the payback periods? And here we we distinguish 3 different levels. We have a payback period without benefits, which means this is the basic normal calculation that is usually done just looking into the energy cost reduction. We have a payback period calculation with wider benefits, like we call it. This is including the reduction of sick days, tax returns, and the reduction of CO2 emission costs. And then we have the payback periods with societal benefits, which means the increase of performance, job creation, and reduction of unemployment expenditure. So it's the bigger picture. And next one, please. So when we look into the lines for the payback periods, we see that when we since we only had a 10% reduction of energy consumption, the payback period for only looking into the energy cost reduction is endless. It's, I think, 200 years. If we go the next level higher, including socioeconomic benefits, we're ending up at 14 years. If we're going higher with the socioeconomics and sick days, we're ending up at 10 years. And if we're including all societal effects, then we have a payback period from around 2 years. This is a very short period. It's not realistic because we don't take into account the municipal budget, but I think it shows the potential that lies within these wider benefits. Yeah, that's my presentation. Thank you very much. Yeah, sorry, there's something coming. But just briefly, it's about the tool architecture, how it looks like. Next slide, please. Important here is that we are open for in-depth testing now. So end of October, the tool is finished, and I invite everyone to test it and look into it, try out the different features. And I'm very open for questions as well. So if you're interested, please contact me or contact via our project website. We are very pleased to show you the tool. And yeah, thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Sebastian. We have time for very quick questions because we are a bit behind in the schedule. So if you can also answer briefly, that would be perfect. The first question is again from Rasmus Langren Nordgren. Is it possible to access the ERERAdata, other case studies findings, or somehow gauge preliminary findings from the data that is related to multiple benefits other than energy savings? And if so, how can it be accessed? A quick scan from their website does not show any data.
Yeah, we will publish an overview very soon where we publish the case study results. So it's a very long report on the methodologies and also on the calculation methods and in detail how the results actually are calculated. And this, I think we published this in the end of the year, of the month, as well with the publication of the tool. And then we will have a scalability study, which is coming up in November, where we show the different results in different regions for different building types. And of course, when the progress of the tool persists like it is, then you can create your results easily by yourself for your buildings. So this, but then in-depth, in-depth look into the calculations and the results will be published very soon.
Okay, and the second question, how do you measure, for example, the reduction of sick days for a building that is calculated and not based on real data? Is it based on assumption? And if yes, what are they based on?
It's based on measured data. So we actually, I think it was a 6-year project by the DTU where they looked into a lot of schools and they made questionnaires and they looked into the sick days of the teachers and pupils, and they varied the indoor climate in these schools. So actually, it's experimental data we are basing these numbers on.
Okay. Thanks, Sebastian, for making
Thank you very much for the opportunity.
your answer quite concise. That's perfect. Now we are moving on to another project, to the ENEFIRST project, looking more at the EU and national level and from a policy perspective. And I'm very glad to invite my colleague here for this project, Santa Schmatzberger from BPIE. Santa, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Jean-Sebastian. Yeah, I will present hopefully shortly the ENEFIRST project, which is making the energy efficiency first principle operational. Next slide, or first slide, please. Yeah, so starting with the project, we came up with a definition, which is efficiency first gives priority to demand side resources whenever they are most cost effective from a societal perspective. And the rest I'll let you to read here. So we try to give a definition that includes also the multiple benefits and impacts that Sebastian just mentioned also in his presentation. Next slide, please. Yeah, so and here you can just see the few multiple impacts that we identified in the beginning. And of course, we're trying to give a long-term perspective for decarbonization and climate neutrality. Next slide. Yeah, thank you. We're trying to, with this, this has been a long process within the project, promote an integrated perspective. So we're trying to overcome silo thinking in different policy areas, helping policy officers and market actors and end users to see the perspective of the others and show how EU legislation can be better harmonized. And this is to say that our project started now 2 years ago. So of course, this was before the current developments with the efficiency first guideline that was published. So we're kind of working in parallel here, unfortunately. Next slide, thank you. So we then made some implementation maps with the policy approaches that were identified that were specifically relevant and existing already for implementing EFIRST. We started with a more not so integrated approach, looking at buildings, power sector, and district heating. And from this, we moved to the policy guidelines we call them. Next slide, please. Yeah, so I just want to go shortly into one example. That's the heat pump grant in Ireland. And I mean, Ireland, you probably know, is always a very good example for efficiency first implementation. This is granting financial support only if the minimum energy performance levels of the building are met. So basically putting efficiency first before you get a heat pump grant. And the benefits of that is that obviously the heat pump can be sized adequately for the building, for the efficient building, and it also gives an incentive to improve the building envelope, so we can actually harvest the multiple benefits of the efficiency measures in the building, and it has a positive impact on the entire energy system. We, for these different approaches, and specifically for this one now, we identified barriers and solutions, and we also identified the actors that need to act on the various solutions. So I mean, this is one of the implementation maps that we did. And just to say, I mean, barriers that we identified here specifically, but that also are relevant to a lot of the other building examples are like, we need a reliable framework for energy performance certificates. We need to inform and give more context on the issue of efficiency first and why it is important. And funding needs to be provided for the measures themselves, but also for the assessment of which measures are energy efficient and how energy efficiency first can be implemented. And so the solutions here, obviously increasing funding, but also streamlining funding and involving the necessary actors. So this is all on our website. You are very welcome to look at these very nice implementation maps. Next slide, please. So yes, so then we move from the implementation maps to the policy guidelines, and here we try to have a more integrated approach, dividing it into energy planning and energy related investments, also considering the multiple benefits. And we did a short analysis of the Fit for 55 package. And this will be published at the end of the month. I will just give you a quick overview of the buildings related approaches. Next slide, please. Yes. So integrated planning. We have, for example, the individual planning tools, for example, building passports, which can include efficiency first calculations, helping owners to make more informed, better informed decisions. Because obviously, I mean, on a building level, when you're dealing with owners, which can be companies, but also individual people, it is very difficult to show how efficiency first matters. So these could be really very valuable planning tools. But also, for example, linking municipal heat and renovation roadmaps to ensure that new heating networks or upgraded heating networks take into account that buildings will be more efficient in the future or becoming more efficient. And so that efficiency first can be implemented on this level as well. Next slide. Yeah, and we looked at public financing also. So integrating EFIRST in EU funding streams could make a huge difference for EFIRST, and this could be, for example, making EFIRST assessment a prerequisite for higher funding or earmarking a minimum share of the budget for demand-side efficiency measures. Carbon revenue recycling is already being used for energy efficiency measures. Earmarking them for, or at least not the entirety of them maybe, but a certain percentage for energy efficiency measures could also be a good implementation of EFIRST and ensure that there's enough money for these measures. And of course, public procurement, we've identified as a very important aspect across all levels actually, because of course streamlining public procurement roles can also be a good practice for other actors. Next slide. Yeah, and then we have approaches for EFIRST and end user investment decisions. And there's the financial incentives for renewables linked to energy performance, which I already talked about. We have the Fabric First approach, which is also an Irish approach, which also means that you need to reach higher energy performance standards before addressing the heating system or building services. We have the minimum energy performance standards, which everybody's talking about now, and which, if they are designed properly, could also give priority to demand-side measures and also set monitoring for demand reductions. So this is, of course, a question of how they are designed and basically on a EU or national level, wherever they are implemented. And dynamic tariffs also fall under this. So the smart use of existing networks, and that's also can be used for energy efficiency first implementation. And we have complementary measures to implement EFIRST. And those, I think, are also, I mean, they're also cross-cutting, obviously, and they are very important, but difficult often to implement, like building institutional capacities, raising awareness, overcoming this silo thinking that we often see in policymaking and also the professional fields, unfortunately, educating the consumers and increasing data availability and digital monitoring, which is also proves very difficult at times, but could really help EFIRST implementation. So this is the main points on buildings for these policy guidelines, which will be published at the end of the month. Our upcoming work is that we will be doing case studies on Germany, Hungary, and Spain. We will analyze the EFIRST policies in these countries, assess whether they are working or not, and their transferability as well. And then at the end of the project, which is next year, we will provide some recommendations for policymakers on how to implement EFIRST. And we are also on the in another work stream, which I am not part of, looking at doing some modeling on the inefficiency first principle on 2 levels. That is on the member state level and the local level. That's being led by the Fraunhofer Institute and Tim Mandel, and he will be speaking next Wednesday at the EMPE conference. So if you're interested in the modeling results, then please join that or contact us or look at our website. Those results, if I'm not mistaken, will also be available sometime this year. So yeah, sign up for a newsletter if you're interested. We have 2 more slides, I think, that we don't need to look at in detail. I posed some questions, but maybe there are some questions from the audience as well.
Thanks a lot, Santa, for this presentation. We've put, in the meantime, you can find in the chat the links to the website of the different projects and as well to the EMPE conference that Santa just mentioned. And as we are a bit behind in the schedule, I suggest now we move to the last presentation from Brian van Mattison of the Aalborg University about the synergy projects. Okay, Jana, you tell me when it's okay because we need to make him presenter. So Brian, normally now you can share your screen. We can see your screen. And you're muted, so I don't know if you can unmute. Yeah. Yes, well, now we hear you. That's perfect. Right. So the floor is yours, Brian.
And thank you for all of the previous speakers for a very interesting morning. I will present some of the issues on synergies, and I'll go right ahead. Our project is fundamentally about quantifying the energy efficiency potentials in European countries and in the different sectors in Europe. And fundamentally, the energy efficiency first principle is about understanding that it's important to look at the cost-effective measures on the demand side, but also in the conversion sector before starting to build renewables, or I would say rather in combination with building renewables. But the key questions are, how do we prioritize energy efficiency measures that also have an effect in the future? What are the supply chain effects of energy savings in future energy system, and what does the future actually look like in this respect, and what is the role of energy efficiency? And on the right here, you see a number of different issues that we're dealing with in the synergies project, and I'll try to come into the different details going ahead. The energy efficiency first principle is here dedicated to sort of sector-oriented models with a temporal and spatial analysis element. So we have rather a bottom-up approach, and we have basically sort of 4 objectives. We want to develop holistic temporal and spatial assessments of energy efficiency potentials. We want to assess the energy-related impacts to quantify them both on primary energy side, but also on the cost side, as well as throughout the supply system and across the different sectors. We want to assess the additional impacts, sort of the non-energy impacts that are on the different markets, but also in relation to real estate prices, urban development, air pollution, these kind of issues. And then we have the objective of having an online GIS visualization platform where we have concrete examples of what kind of measures could be done. Of course, only those relevant to be able to show on the on our mapping system. The energy efficiency approach is divided into buildings, transport, industry, and energy grids, and I'll come into those sectors in a minute. Those issues are combined in advanced energy systems modeling on the entire European continent, based on a bottom-up approach, but also divided into the different countries. And that is then combined with spatial analysis. Spatial analysis creates both inputs for the modeling and for the sectors, but is also creating visualization of the results of our modeling and our tools. And if we look at the different work streams in sEEnergies, buildings, transport, industry, and grids, our aim is to have detailed energy demand simulation models that can look at the potentials from bottom up in each of these sectors. And you'll notice that when we say energy efficiency, first probably most people will think, well, that's electricity and heat, but here we regard industry and transport as part of the energy system. So that is of course then part of our assessment as well. The results are different kind of cost curves, but also strategies on the different sectors. How important is it with the more effective vehicles, modal shift, transport demand measures, or what are the potential of different developments of the building envelope or electricity savings. Also, what is the effect of using excess heat from industry? All of those kind of sub-sector bottom-up detailed sort of questions we're trying to answer in our project here. We go into some of the sectors. Here's our tool, which I developed about 10 years ago, Transport Plan, which we have further developed in this project here. The system is, the transport system is really complex, and it's both related to behavioral aspects and rather technical vehicle aspects, as well as the infrastructure. So our aim here is to really dismantle or defragment transport in order to understand what kind of measures can we do. Can we put more people in the vehicles? Can we change the growth in the demands? Can we have different modal shift issues? We go from using a car to using a train, and what is the effect of that? What is the actual potential? So that's what we're trying to do. And just a few examples. So this actually represents sort of a business as usual transport demand that is showed in the Clean Planet for All publications. What you can see is that we are expecting lower CO2 emissions, but it's only decreasing by around 30-40%. And we still have a lot of fossil fuels in the form of diesel, kerosene, and petrol in our mix here. So of course we need to do something about this. We're trying to do that with our transport plan model, where we look at the infrastructure development, we look at different technologies, so it could be electrification or power to X, and then we look at the technology costs as well in different levels in order to make different scenarios. One of the things we're looking at, for example, is a concept called peak car. Don't know if you heard about the peak car concept, but it is an occurring phenomenon which is basically related to the fact that people at some point can't drive anymore in their car, and it's not possible to build any more infrastructure. And we've seen it in some countries, but here we sort of make a scenario where we look at when could the peak car situation come, and what does that mean for the growth. And we've divided Europe here into 4 areas where peak car occurs in 2030 in most of Europe, but then in the eastern part of Europe it occurs maybe in 2040. And then we have a different result compared to the Commission's scenarios, where we will see sort of a more stagnating transport demand development in a more energy efficient EU development compared to sort of a traditional transport economic projection of the demands. Another thing we're looking at, of course, is different scenarios using different techniques. And just a peak view here of some of our 2050 scenarios. You can see that that the baseline sort of shows that the primary energy demand is decreased by around 20-30%, but we can create different scenarios. The biofuel one is not very efficient, and we have hydrogen as an option, battery electric vehicles with e-fuels. We have heavy electrification measures, a heavy electrification scenario, and then we have the 1.5 tech scenario from the publication in Clean Planet for All. I don't have the possibility to go into a lot of detail, but of course here we can see that heavy electrification is really the way to go on the energy efficiency side, but there are of course costs related to that. If we go to industry, we try basically to open up the black box of industry, looking at the different sectors, trying to find out what is the possibilities in the different parts of industry. And we do that using a number of sources to understand the industrial sectors. And then we try to understand what kind of technologies can we use in order to change these systems. And here you can see sort of some scenarios we created for Germany, where we try to reduce the CO2 emissions and create a more energy efficiency industrial sector using electrification and different kind of energy saving measures. Here's another example of Germany, and here's divided into the different parts of industry. Paper and pulp, for example, we are able to reduce the energy demand by around 40%, and also in for example iron and steel, if we use best available technology, we're able to reduce around 30%. And then on top of this, we of course have to change the fuel mix. Going ahead, we try to combine our different sectors, and I'll come a bit into buildings in a minute. But when we combine the different sectors, we try to understand how the system can look like in the future, in a more in both the 1.5 tech scenario by the Commission in a business as usual system, but also in a more interlinked smart energy system. And we're doing this because we need to understand that the sectors will have different roles and different formats in the future, and we need to understand energy efficiency in that system, or in that context, I mean. When we do this modeling, we also have a strong focus on the storages in our system. So we try to use all of the storages that are available, and of course energy savings also have an effect on storages, but what a key role or key thing to note is that it's more important to save energy than to move energy around. And I'm sure Copenhagen municipality can confirm that. Anders also talked about peaks compared to flexibility. So peaks is really important to reduce. But in our modeling, we try to combine the understanding of that. One of the things I just want to mention here is how important district heating is, because here in district heating, we can both collect the waste heat, but we can also have a much more efficient energy storage. If we compare thermal energy storage with electricity storage, it's a factor of 100 in difference. And if we compare smaller storages like a Tesla Powerwall to a pumped hydro storage, or a small heat storage in a building to a pit storage, then we know that bigger is better and cheaper. So it matters to have all of the infrastructure in place. And some people will say, well, district heating is a counterpart to energy efficiency. And I just have to emphasize, it's really not. There's a huge synergy between doing both of these issues. And in sEEnergies, we are mapping the possibility to have district heating all over Europe. You could already go to our website to have a look at your city and your local setting to see what our assessment is of the area. And we're doing that using different advanced modeling features that we have developed both throughout previous Heat Roadmap Europe projects, but also here in sEEnergies. And in sEEnergies, we want to try and do something we call future mapping, where we actually illustrate what things could develop into. In the heating sector, we really recommend heat savings everywhere between 30 and 50%. And this is real heat savings. It's not just putting PV on the roof, which is a misunderstanding, really. It's actually the building envelope that we're emphasizing, that we need to have a reduction of 30 to 50%. And then it's trying to understand how much district heating, and our sort of preliminary assessment shows 50% heat demand can be covered conservatively by district heat, and the rest should be covered by individual heat pumps. And in both systems, we have a lot of potential using energy savings combined with that. From our previous projects, we can see here an example of what we will also get out of sEEnergies, sort of some levels of district heating in different countries. Here you see a huge potential in Spain, in Italy, and that's really based on that the buildings are placed in rather close to each other, so district heating is cheap and has a huge potential. There are some countries that have a lower potential, like for example Hungary, where the buildings are more distributed, and you can compare the cost of district heating pipes and waste heat potentials to individual solutions in each country, and in that sense you get an assessment of how much district heating is viable in those areas. So in order to have an integrated energy system, we also published this a few years back, where we showed how many investments we should really make in district heating. And basically it shows that we need to build around 8,000 new grids before 2030 that can then develop and grow until 2050 if we want to also realize some of the potential in combining the infrastructure. And I think the energy price crisis, not the energy supply crisis, but the energy price crisis that we have now, really shows the importance of expanding this infrastructure, because this will make us much less vulnerable to fluctuating prices, because we here replace natural gas with a lot of other heat sources for heating the buildings. Just an example of waste heat. This is the Dutch case, where we can see a heat demand of around 300 petajoules, and we have an excess heat of a potential of 560 petajoule, but they have no district heating basically in the Netherlands, which is rather silly when they could actually cover almost twice the heat demand with the waste heat potential. And it's certainly not a technical barrier here to improve the energy efficiency. It's a political barrier to implement the market frameworks to make this possible. With those words, I would like to thank you for your attention, and I'm ready to take a few questions.
Thanks a lot, Brian, for your great presentation. I think that's a very nice conclusion also for this webinar. Maybe I would have a first question to you. You mentioned that in sEEnergies you are also looking at interactions between sectors, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
So maybe from the work and the research you have done already, where would you see the most critical interactions?
So most critical interactions would be, well, when we have a whole new, what I would call do I still share my slides, or did you remove those?
Yeah, we see your slides, yes.
Yeah, but you can also remove the slides. I don't have any more to show. But anyway, the most important part to be aware of is really power to X. That's a real game changer here, because power to X is really not an energy efficiency measure. It's a measure we need to do because we can't decarbonize some of the other sectors without it. And though it's not for heating, it's for steel production, and then it's for ships and planes, really. All of the other things we can electrify. But here we will see a huge synergy between the electricity sector, the heating sector, and the production of power to X fuels, and also a really strong need to coordinate where do we place electrolysis plants, and where do we where do we actually have potential to to use that synergy, because there'll be huge amount of waste heat from power to X, but also it's important to have the power to X production close to the renewable energy, and there's a real synergy here. But there are also upstream synergies from reducing the heat demands. The peaks in the heat demand has such a large effect on the need for power plants, the need for boilers, the need for investments, that the peaks needs to be lowered, and there's really huge synergy over into the renewable energy sector if we look at the storages between electricity and heat.
Okay, thanks, Brian. And maybe a last question. You mentioned the importance of developing district heating and the possible synergies with energy efficiency in buildings, but sometimes that's not so obvious. So, what would you say to the not maybe the criticism, but the challenge of managing a district heating when you see the heat demand in the buildings already connected decreasing, which can put at risk, let's say, the business model of the district heating company?
The business model of district heating is that it should be consumer owned. It has to be regarded as a public asset, and a monopolistic system. If you have a demand to have a payback of 15% of your investment in district heating, the potential for district heating in Europe is around 20%. In Denmark, the case is we just completed a new survey, a new study for Denmark, and we can see there's a potential to expand the district heating here to cover 70% of the demand. And this is actually what we see as well in society. It's not something we sort of make up. Imagine that Copenhagen municipality that you heard of before is making a new development. Then it only makes sense to have district heating because the individual options are too expensive. And the connection, it sort of dawns on me, or I keep wondering how it can be seen as a counterpart. Because if you have a building that is well insulated, you still need to have a technical installation to heat the house and to have hot water. And it's that technical installation you have to compare with the price of district heating. And in the Danish case, new detached houses with an energy demand of maybe 50 or in that range 50 kilowatt hours per square meter, they are connected to district heating.
I guess low temperature district heating, I guess.
Then it becomes lower temperature district heating. Yeah, I didn't talk so much about that, but that's of course that's part of the synergy that we have between the energy savings part and the heating part. That is really that if we lower the temperatures, then we have more viable options to use the waste heat, because we don't have to heat. We don't have to distribute heat that is 80 degrees hot or warm. We can maybe distribute heat that is 65 degrees hot, which is very different and much more much easier and has a much future potential.
Okay, thanks a lot, Brian. I think we will stop here because we are already 10 minutes behind the initial end of this webinar. I think again a lot all the speakers. I think all the presentation were very complementary and provide a good overview of what can be done and how, and what tools or let's say support can be found to implement energy efficiency first. I remind you that if you want to continue the discussions or continue to learn about this topic of energy efficiency first, there will be on Tuesday the session organized by the European Commission as part of EUSEW. And then on Wednesday also you can join our colleague Tim Mondel from Fraunhofer ASAI at the EMPE conference, the Energy Modeling Platform for Europe conference, to hear more about the modeling approach to energy efficiency first. And with that, I wish you a very pleasant day. I thank all the participants for attending, for your questions, and I hope it was also a very interesting and stimulating for you. Have a good day. Bye-bye.